Everyone talks about the Charger, the GTO, the Chevelle. Those are the ones that get the posters, the movie deals, the six-figure auction prices. But the 1970s produced dozens of machines that were just as fast, just as violent, and just as brilliant. Machines that history somehow forgot to celebrate. These are the cars that humiliated Corvettes at stoplights, terrorized drag strips across America, and then quietly disappeared into the shadows while their more famous cousins got all the glory. Today, we fix that. Number 15. The 1970 AMC Rebel Machine. American Motors didn't have the budget of General Motors. They didn't have Ford's marketing army or Chrysler's racing pedigree. What they had was something more dangerous, nothing to lose. And in 1970, that attitude produced the Rebel Machine, a car so aggressively styled and so unexpectedly quick that it blindsided an entire industry that had already written AMC off as irrelevant. The looks, the Rebel Machine did not believe in subtlety. The standard version came dressed in red, white, and blue paint, with a massive functional hood scoop that looked like it had been borrowed from a top-fuel dragster. It was loud, it was proud, and it was absolutely unashamedly American in a way that would make a bald eagle tear up. Under that patriotic sheet, metal sat AMC's 390 cubic inch V8, producing 340 horsepower and 430 pound-feet of torque. In a car that weighed under 3,500 pounds, that combination gave the machine a power-to-weight ratio that made it genuinely dangerous company at any stoplight in America. Quarter-mile times came in around 14.5 seconds at over 95 miles per hour. Numbers that sent more than a few Camaros home embarrassed. The problem was the chassis. AMC suspension tuning was primitive compared to the big three, and the steering was vague enough that attacking corners required a certain optimism about your own survival. But in a straight line, the Rebel Machine was a genuine threat. Only around 2,000 were built, which makes finding one today feel like spotting a unicorn wearing a flag. If AMC had more money and more time, this car could have changed everything. Number 14. The 1971 Dodge Charger Super B. Here's a name most people associate with the Roadrunner, not the Charger. But in 1971, Dodge did something unexpected. They transplanted the Super B nameplate directly into the Charger body, creating a car that combined the budget muscle philosophy of the Roadrunner with the visual menace of the most iconic body in American automotive history. The result was one of the most underrated Mopars ever assembled. The Super B came standard with a 383 cubic inch V8, but the buyers who understood what they were looking at went straight for the options sheet. Check the right boxes, and you walked out with a 440 cubic inch six-pack setup, 3 two-barrel carburetors sitting on an aluminum intake manifold, producing 385 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque. And if you wanted to truly lose your mind, the 426 Hemi was still on the table. The Charger body gave the Super B something its Roadrunner cousin never had: genuine visual presence. That long, fastback roofline, the hidden headlights, the aggressive front fascia. This was a car that looked fast sitting in a parking lot at 3 in the morning with the lights off. Quarter-mile times with the six-pack hovered in the mid-13-second range. Insurance companies panicked. Dodge only produced a fraction of these compared to mainstream Chargers, and most of them have since been crushed, modified, or forgotten. That's a tragedy with a 4-barrel carburetor on top. Number 13. The 1970 Pontiac Firebird Formula 400. Everyone remembers the Trans Am, the screaming chicken on the hood, Burt Reynolds, the whole mythology, but Pontiac's smarter buyers in 1970 skipped the Trans Am entirely and bought the Formula. And they were right to do it. The Firebird Formula 400 was everything the Trans Am was, mechanically speaking, wrapped in a cleaner, less theatrical package. No giant hood decal, no performance anxiety about what the neighbors would think. Just a long, elegant hood, a functional twin-scoop intake system, and a 400 cubic inch V8 that produced 330 horsepower in standard form. Or 345 with the Ram Air 3 package breathing cold air through those functional scoops. Want the Ram Air 4? That was 370 horsepower, though independent testing consistently showed Pontiac was being extremely conservative with those numbers. The real output was closer to 430 horses, and the quarter mile reflected it. High 12-second runs for properly equipped cars. Here's what made the formula genuinely special beyond its engine. Because it didn't carry the Trans Am's premium, buyers could option it more heavily for the same money. And because it looked more restrained, opponents at the drag strip consistently underestimated it, right up until the moment the lights went green and they found themselves staring at taillights. The Formula 400 was proof that the quieter muscle car was often the most dangerous one. Number 12, the 1971 Mercury Cyclone spoiler 429. Mercury doesn't get invited to many muscle car conversations. That's a mistake. In 1971, while Ford was strangling performance everywhere else in their lineup, Mercury quietly offered the Cyclone spoiler with the 429 cubic inch Cobra Jet V8. An engine that officially made 370 horsepower, but whose real output was something the factory preferred not to discuss publicly. Put it this way, independent dyno testing suggested the Cobra Jet was making closer to 420 horses, quarter-mile times in the low 13-second range, trap speeds over 100 miles per hour. Those are numbers that belong in a conversation with the Hemi cars. And almost nobody was having that conversation about a Mercury. The Cyclone's body was pure aerodynamic aggression, a low fastback shape that Ford had developed partly through their NASCAR program, giving it the kind of slippery coefficient that helped maintain speed at the top end where lesser cars ran out of ideas. The car was heavy, nearly 3,900 pounds, and the suspension was tuned more for high-speed oval stability than canyon carving. Corners were not its natural habitat. Straight lines, though, the Cyclone spoiler owned them. Mercury built very few of these, and most buyers didn't even know the car existed. That combination of rarity and genuine performance makes a clean Cyclone spoiler one of the most interesting finds in all of 1970s muscle. And yet, you almost never see one at a car show, which is exactly the problem this list exists to solve. Number 11, the 1972 Buick Grand Sport Stage 1. By 1972, the muscle car era was supposed to be finished. Emissions regulations had started squeezing horsepower numbers. Insurance premiums were bankrupting young enthusiasts. The party was ending, and everyone knew it. And then Buick showed up with the Grand Sport Stage 1 and proved that it wasn't quite over yet. Not if you knew where to look. The 455 cubic inch Stage 1 V8 officially produced 270 horsepower under the new SAE net ratings that measure power with all accessories and restrictions in place. That number sounds modest until you realize the old gross rating system would have put it closer to 360 horses, and that the torque figure was a staggering 510 pound-feet. 510. That was more torque than the Hemi, more torque than the LS6. More torque than almost anything wearing an American badge in 1972. Quarter-mile times in the high 13-second range were standard. But the Grand Sport's real trick was its delivery. That torque arrived so low in the rev range that the car felt like it was being pushed by something invisible from the moment you touched the throttle. Buick kept the exterior restrained and dignified. This was still a Buick after all, which meant opponents had absolutely no idea what they were dealing with until it was already too late. In 1972, that was the most dangerous combination possible. Number 10, the 1970 Oldsmobile Cutlass W31. While the 442 W30 got most of Oldsmobile's performance attention in 1970, there was a smaller, lighter, and in some ways more exciting option hiding in the lineup that almost nobody ordered and almost nobody remembers. The Cutlass W31, where the W30 used a 455 cubic inch big block to make its power. The W31 took a completely different approach. Oldsmobile engineers built a hot-rodded 350 cubic inch small block, force-fed with a cold air induction system fitted with a high-lift camshaft and tuned to produce 325 horsepower. In a Cutlass body that weighed significantly less than the big block cars, the result was a power-to-weight ratio that produced quarter-mile times in the 14-second range, with a car that handled far better than anything stuffed with a 455 had any right to. Think of it as Oldsmobile's answer to the Chevrolet Z28, a small block screamer that rewarded drivers who actually understood what they were buying. Most people walked into the showroom, saw the engine displacement, and walked back out toward the 442 without a second glance. The W31 owners watched them go and smiled quietly to themselves. Only a few hundred were ever produced, making this one of the most obscure performance packages in the entire muscle car era. If you find one, you found something genuinely special. Number 9. The 1974 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am Super Duty 455. By 1974, writing about fast American cars felt like writing obituaries. The oil crisis was strangling the industry, emissions regulations were gutting performance. Everything good was dying. And then Pontiac did something absolutely insane. They somehow convinced the Environmental Protection Agency to let them sell a genuine race engine to the general public. The Super Duty 455 was not supposed to exist. This was a 7.5-liter engine with forged pistons, a high-lift camshaft, special cylinder heads with larger valves, improved porting, and an attitude toward emissions regulations that can only be described as optimistic. The official rating was 290 horsepower under the miserable net system. The reality was something the factory preferred to keep between itself and anyone who actually drove one. Quarter-mile times in the mid-13-second range. 0 to 60 in under 6 seconds. In 1974, while every other manufacturer was building cars that struggled to motivate themselves onto the highway, Pontiac was delivering a machine that could embarrass sports cars from a decade earlier. Only around 1,000 Super Duty Trans Ams were built before Pontiac was forced to abandon the engine. Each one was a rolling act of defiance. Pontiac's declaration that performance wasn't dead, it was just temporarily inconvenienced. Today, these cars are recognized as among the most important muscle cars ever built. At the time, almost nobody noticed they existed. That's the automotive tragedy of the decade. Number 8. The 1970 Plymouth Roadrunner 440+6. The Roadrunner was always supposed to be the everyman's muscle car, stripped down, affordable, unpretentious. Plymouth's whole philosophy was maximum violence at minimum cost, and they wrapped it in cartoon graphics because apparently that was a completely normal thing to do and nobody questioned it. But in 1970, Plymouth added the 440+6 option. 3 2-barrel carburetors feeding 440 cubic inches of angry V8, and the budget street brawler became something genuinely frightening. 390 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque. The power delivery was the real story. At part throttle, only the center carburetor worked, and the car felt almost manageable. Then you rolled past the halfway point, the outboard carburetors opened, and something entirely different happened. Quarter-mile times in the mid-13-second range. 0 to 60 in under 6 seconds, from a car that cost less than $4,000. Insurance companies saw the performance numbers and started raising premiums before the ink was dry on the window sticker. Drag racing organizations bumped it into higher classes almost immediately. The Roadrunner never pretended to be sophisticated. The floor mats were rubber, the interior was loud and basic and completely honest about what this car was for. But in 1970, with the 440+6 under that cartoon hood, it was one of the 10 fastest production cars you could buy anywhere on Earth. That's not nothing, that's everything. Number 7. The 1971 Ford Mustang Boss 351. Ford's Boss 429 gets all the love. The Boss 302 gets the road racing credibility. The Boss 351 sits between them, consistently overlooked, consistently underestimated, and consistently faster than people expect when they finally look up the numbers. Ford built the Boss 351 around the largest small block they could engineer without crossing into big block territory. A 351 cubic inch V8 that could rev to 7,000 RPM in an era when most American V8s started running out of breath around 5,000. 330 horsepower, officially, though real-world output was closer to 400 horses with the right tuning. The Boss 351 could hit 60 miles per hour in under 6 seconds and run the quarter mile in the low 14-second range. But what made it genuinely different from the brute force big block cars was its character. This engine wanted to be revved. It encouraged aggressive driving in a way that torque monsters never did. You had to work for the power, and working for it felt spectacular. Ford only produced 1 year of Boss 351 Mustangs before the model was canceled. 1971 was its only season, which makes survivors genuinely rare. Most people shopping for Boss Mustangs walk straight past the 351 toward the 429, which means the 351 remains, ironically, the more attainable and arguably more rewarding driver's car. That's a secret worth keeping. Or, telling 15 to 20 million YouTube subscribers. One of those? Number 6. The 1970 Dodge Coronet RT Hemi. Here's the problem with the Dodge Charger. It was so beautiful, so culturally dominant, that everything else Dodge built in 1970 with the same running gear became invisible by comparison. The Coronet RT with the Hemi engine is the greatest example of a legendary car hiding in a famous car's shadow. The 426 cubic inch Hemi sat under the Coronet's hood, producing 425 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque. The same engine, the same numbers, the same terrifying performance as the Charger. Quarter-mile times in the mid-13-second range at over 100 miles per hour. 0 to 60 in under 6 seconds. These were supercar numbers in 1970, available in a full-size body that most people drove straight past without a second look. And that was exactly the point. The Coronet RT Hemi was the ultimate sleeper, a car that looked like something a reasonably successful insurance salesman might drive to work, right up until you heard that Hemi idle and watched everything around it disappear. The long 117-inch wheelbase gave it straight-line stability that smaller muscle cars couldn't match, and the Hemi's massive torque meant it pulled like a freight train from any speed, at any gear, under any circumstances. Dodge built very few Hemi Coronets. Most buyers went for the Charger because of course they did. The Charger was the Charger. The Coronet buyers were the ones who actually understood what they were getting. History, as usual, rewarded the flashy choice with the fame. But on the street, the Coronet was every bit as fast and twice as surprising. Number 5. The 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1. This one still makes people do a double take. Buick. Not Chevrolet, not Pontiac, not Dodge. Buick, the brand your grandfather drove to his dentist appointment, built one of the fastest and most shocking muscle cars of the entire 1970s era. The GSX Stage 1 arrived in Apollo White, or Saturn Yellow, with bold black stripes, a hood-mounted tachometer, and a level of aggression that seemed physically impossible coming from a brand known for comfortable seats and opera windows. Under the hood sat the 455 cubic inch Stage 1 V8 with 360 horsepower, officially, and here is the important part, 510 pound-feet of torque. Car and Driver tested a GSX Stage 1 in 1970 and called it the fastest car they had tested all year, faster than the Hemi Cuda, quicker than the LS6 Chevelle, a Buick, faster than the Hemi. Let that sink in for a moment. Quarter-mile times in the low 13-second range, trap speeds around 106 miles per hour. The GSX could launch with a violence that the driver never fully expected, because nothing about the Buick brand prepared you for what happened when you buried the throttle. The torque hit so early and so hard that the rear tires simply gave up the argument and started making smoke. Buick sold 678 GSX models in 1970. Fewer than 400 were Stage 1 cars. They made almost no cultural impact at the time. Today, a clean GSX Stage 1 is worth well over $200,000, which tells you everything about how history eventually corrects its own mistakes. Number 4. The 1970 Ford Torino Cobra, 429 Cobra Jet. Ford spent the late 1960s chasing Chevrolet and Mopar in every performance category. And by 1970, they had built something in the Torino Cobra that deserved far more recognition than it ever received. This was Ford's mid-size bruiser, long, low, aggressive, and powered by a 429 cubic inch V8 that the factory officially rated at 370 horsepower. Everyone who drove one understood that number was a polite fiction. Real-world dyno tests put the Cobra jet closer to 450 horses, and Ford was deliberately underreporting the output to manage insurance premiums and keep regulators from looking too closely. It was a common industry strategy in 1970. It worked mostly. Quarter-mile times in the mid-13-second range, trap speeds over 105 miles per hour. The Torino Cobra rode on a frame developed partly through Ford's NASCAR program, and the aerodynamic fastback body gave it a slippery shape that helped maintain top-end speed in ways that boxy competitors simply couldn't match. The handling was better than most muscle cars of the era because the platform had been designed with oval racing in mind, and high-speed stability was baked into the engineering. Ford didn't give the Torino Cobra the marketing muscle it deserved, which is why the Mustang got all the glory while the Torino got all the actual racing wins. NASCAR loved this car. The street racing community respected it deeply. The general public largely ignored it, their loss entirely. Number 3. The 1969 AMC SC Rambler. Yes, we are including a Rambler on this list. No, we are not apologizing for it. Because the SC Rambler, built by American Motors in partnership with Hearst Performance, was one of the most aggressively insane factory drag racing weapons ever assembled. And the fact that it wore an AMC badge is exactly why nobody saw it coming. American Motors took their humble, compact Rambler body, stuffed it with a 390 cubic inch V8 producing 315 horsepower, bolted on a Hearst-shifted 4-speed manual transmission, and sent it into the world wearing the loudest, most outrageous paint scheme of the entire muscle car era. Red, white, and blue. A massive functional hood scoop, an arrow, an actual painted arrow on the hood, pointing directly at the air intake as if to say, yes, the power is in there, thank you for noticing. 0 to 60 in under 6 seconds, quarter mile in the high 13-second range, from a Rambler. A car that weighed barely 3,000 pounds, with an engine that had no business being anywhere near that chassis. The power-to-weight ratio was genuinely remarkable, and the performance reflected it completely. AMC built 1,500 SC Ramblers across 2 production runs, each one essentially a factory-built drag racer with a license plate. Drag racing sanctioning bodies moved it into higher classes almost immediately. Insurance companies reacted with the kind of horror usually reserved for natural disasters. Nobody expected a Rambler to do this. That was precisely the point, and it was brilliant. Number 2. The 1971 Plymouth GTX 440+6. By 1971, Plymouth's GTX was supposed to be the gentleman's muscle car, the sophisticated choice, the one you bought when you wanted serious performance without completely abandoning your dignity. The 440+6 engine option then proceeded to destroy that reputation entirely in the best possible way. 3 2-barrel carburetors on an aluminum intake manifold fed 440 cubic inches of Mopar fury, 385 horsepower, and 490 pound-feet of torque in a car that weighed 3,700 pounds and carried every option the GTX lineup offered. This wasn't a stripped-down warrior. This was a fully loaded, air-conditioned, comfortable grand touring machine that could run the quarter mile in the mid-13-second range. The power delivery was the GTX's particular form of madness. At partial throttle, with only the center carburetor working, the car felt composed, refined, almost reasonable. Then you asked for full power, and all 3 carburetors opened simultaneously. And suddenly the rear tires were having a very bad day, and you were having a very good one. Plymouth only built a fraction of GTX models with this engine, and 1971 was among the final years where this kind of performance was even legally possible. Emissions regulations were closing in. The insurance industry was engaged in open warfare with the muscle car market. The GTX 440+6 was one of the last truly great expressions of the formula before everything changed forever. That makes it not just fast, but genuinely historic. Number 1. The 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle LS6. This is the one, the car that defined what street terror actually meant. The machine Chevrolet's own engineers looked at, decided was too much, and then built anyway. Because it was 1970 and nobody had hit the brakes on the horsepower wars yet. The Chevelle SS LS6 carried a 454 cubic inch V8 rated at 450 horsepower and 500 pound-feet of torque. And unlike virtually every other manufacturer playing the underrating game in 1970, Chevrolet wasn't being modest. That number was real, and the car proved it every single time someone found the courage to use full throttle. Motor Trend tested one and recorded a quarter-mile time of 13.12 seconds at 107 miles per hour. One of the fastest production car results any American publication had ever put on paper. 0 to 60 in 5.5 seconds. From something that looked, from a distance, like any other Chevelle on the road. That gap between appearance and reality is what made it genuinely dangerous. The National Hot Rod Association banned it from pure stock competition immediately. Insurance companies tripled premiums and then debated whether to offer coverage at all. Chevrolet built roughly 4,000 LS6 Chevelle before emissions regulations forced them to kill the engine after just 1 year. 4,000 cars, 1 year. The fastest, most unhinged production muscle car America ever built. Canceled before most people even knew it existed. That's not just a fast car, that's a tragedy with a hood scoop.